Dr. Intan Azura Mokhtar. Senior Minister of State Edwin Tong.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the various members for speaking up in support of the bill, and I wish to now address the members' queries on the bill. At its heart, this bill recognizes that more needs to be done to achieve the sustained declines in smoking prevalence. And I reiterate the statistic that I mentioned at the start of this session, which is that 1 in 5 men smoke daily, higher than in many developed countries. That's a statistic that we don't want to see and which we want to arrest and reverse. Tobacco use, including smoking, remains therefore a significant public health problem in Singapore. Our long-standing public health objective is to promote and move towards a tobacco-free society, a point that several members have reiterated earlier as well. This bill is another in the suite of tools we have introduced and which we will continue to introduce as necessary to control tobacco consumption. Professor Fatima Latif has made the point that it will be short-sighted to view this bill as a single entity. I agree entirely. The SP proposal must therefore be seen in the context of Singapore's various multi-pronged approach to tobacco control. Our approach includes a comprehensive mix of strategies, and that includes public education, the provision of smoking cessation services, taxation, and legislation, amongst other things, to control tobacco. Labeling, advertising, and promotion, smoking in public places, and sales of cigarettes to minors, all of which work in tandem to control tobacco consumption. Mr. Louis Ng has asked for clarification on how standardized packaging can be expected to reduce the potential of tobacco packaging to mislead consumers on the harmful effects of smoking. In particular, he suggests that certain studies found that Australia's standardized packaging measures did not adequately address the goal of reducing the ability of tobacco packaging to mislead smokers on the harmful effects of smoking. I'd like to address those points in some detail. There is a broad and extensive range of international and local research and evidence which shows that standardized packaging is likely to be effective in meeting public health objectives, the 5 points which I outlined earlier. MOH has reviewed over 200 primary studies, reviews and materials relating to standardized packaging and enlarged graphic health warnings, originating from a wide range of sources and countries and also across multiple disciplines, such as public health, marketing, psychology, economics, and econometrics. MOH has also taken into consideration the feedback from our several public consultations in formulating our final assessment of the evidence pertaining to the SP proposal. Studies internationally have found that through the elimination of logo and design elements, plain packs were perceived as less attractive, less attention-grabbing, and less likely to be purchased by youths compared with branded and novel packs. Indeed, the US Surgeon General's report in 2012 concluded, and I quote, "There is strong, consistent evidence that advertising and promotion influence the factors that lead directly to tobacco use by adolescents, including the initiation of cigarette smoking as well as its continuation," unquote. Therefore, addressing the labeling and packaging of tobacco products is an important step towards reducing smoking uptake and prevalence. This is also aligned to what WHO itself recommends under the FCTC. WHO concluded in 2016 that, and I quote again, "There is a large body of empirical evidence for introduction of standardized packaging, and that this evidence suggests that standardized packaging makes health warnings, restrictions on tobacco advertising, promotion, and sponsorship, as well as restrictions on misleading tobacco packaging more effective," unquote. In April 2015, after the introduction of the measures in Australia, the Australian government published its post-implementation review data in a series of peer-reviewed journal papers. The studies concluded that the objectives of Australia's plain packaging measures have been met, and again, I quote, "Plain packaging is severely restricting the ability of the pack to communicate and create appeal with young people and adults." And also, I quote further from the peer-reviewed journal papers, "Plain packaging is fulfilling its core aims of reducing appeal, particularly among young adults, and increasing warning salience." Unquote. Indeed, studies in Australia after the introduction of plain packaging also found that there were behavioral outcomes associated with greater quit intention and also negative feeling towards tobacco products. For instance, in one study, the number of quit attempts rose after implementation of the measure. The number of calls to quit line also rose by 78%, peaking at 4 weeks post-implementation and sustained right through till 43 weeks post-implementation. There was also evidence that smokers avoided displaying the standardized packs, and there was greater avoidance behavior regarding the graphic health warnings. While it is, of course, itself very challenging to seek to isolate the impact of any one single tobacco control policy, it is noteworthy that in the Australian experience, they have had access to large granular data set collected over an extended period of time. Analysis of this data set indicates that over a period of 34 months, after accounting for other tobacco control measures, Australia's standardized packaging measure contributed to a 0.55 percentage point decline in smoking prevalence that was above and beyond existing trends. 0.55% may seem small. Nonetheless, it is still impactful. In Australia, it meant 108,000 fewer smokers. Together with our own experts in Singapore, we reviewed this study in some detail. We had access to the data set itself, so we didn't just review their conclusions. We looked at their data sets in some detail. And we found that its methodology and its conclusions were thorough, reliable, and credible. And to put the results that they have achieved in context, if we were to apply that in Singapore, it will mean, at the same rate that they have achieved in Australia, it will mean a reduction of 15,000 fewer smokers. All of these are very useful indicators which tell us that the SP proposals that we have put out are the correct measures to take. Overall, the evidence supports the conclusion that the SP proposal is likely, alongside other tobacco measures, to promote public health through the reduction of the prevalence of smoking in Singapore. Whilst there can be no precise prediction on future behavioral trends or how long the impact might take to be felt, or whether other measures might become necessary to achieve even better tobacco control, the current evidence points substantially in favour of there being significant public health benefit in Singapore with the introduction of the SP proposal. Mr. Gantiampo asked about the effectiveness of health warnings. The aim of graphic health warnings on tobacco products is precisely to communicate health risks and also to motivate tobacco users and possibly potential users to either quit, reduce, or not even start consumption. This question has been previously addressed by MOH in this House. Members would know that there is a strong body of international evidence demonstrating the impact of graphic health warnings on knowledge of health effects, thoughts about quitting, use of quit lines, and ultimately on quitting attempts. Studies from Australia, Canada, the US, and the UK have shown impact on behaviours such as noticing cigarette warnings and foregoing cigarettes predict subsequent quitting attempts among individual smokers. For example, a systematic review of 32 studies from 20 countries, including some high-income countries, with more than 800,000 participants, found that graphic health warnings are associated with increased quit line calls, reduced smoking consumption, increased quit attempts, and increased short-term smoking cessation and reduced smoking prevalence. Locally in Singapore, a 2005 study by HPB evaluating the impact of the introduction of graphic health warnings in Singapore showed that 50% of participants were more concerned and worried about their health after seeing the graphic health warnings. This also led to behavior changes where 1 in 4 smokers were motivated to quit smoking and made efforts to abstain from smoking. Non-smokers were also affected, and more than half spoke up to advise their friends and their loved ones to quit smoking. This outcome and finding is also consistent with international evidence on the impact of graphic health warnings. The evidence also suggests that the use of large and noticeable graphic health warnings can reduce smoking initiation. The World Health Organization recommends that countries should consider increasing the size of graphic health warnings to cover more than 50% of tobacco packaging and replacing the images on such warnings every 2 to 3 years to increase the effectiveness. So you rotate and change the images, because otherwise one becomes sensitized and dulled to the images. And this finding is also in part why we have proposed that the graphic health warnings be increased to 75% of the cigarette packaging. I would add on this point, finally, that in the dispute on plain packaging against Australia at the WTO, point which I mentioned in my opening speech earlier, the panel concluded, and I quote, that there is some econometric evidence suggesting that standardized packaging, together with the enlarged graphic health warnings implemented at the same time, contributed to the reduction in overall smoking prevalence, as well as in cigar smoking prevalence observed after their entry into force, unquote. So it's a point that we have also leaned on and taken notice of in implementing our measures in this bill. Dr. Chiashilu asked whether the SP proposal would lead to downtrading and an increase in counterfeit tobacco products. Downtrading describes the phenomenon in which there's a shift from more expensive tobacco products or brands to lower price alternatives in the market. The tobacco industry has contended that standardized packaging will result in this phenomenon, which will in turn lead to an increase in overall tobacco demand or consumption because consumers buy more of lower products when prices are lower. We have looked at this with the advice with our experts. This shift towards lower priced tobacco products in the Australian market was observed even before the introduction of standardized packaging, and is also observed in all other high-income countries, not just in Australia, as smoking prevalence decreases. Much of this is attributable to pricing strategies of the tobacco industry itself, which has been known to increase the price differential between low and higher priced brands when passing on tax increases to the customer. Our own assessment is that any acceleration in trends towards trading in Australia is likely to be largely attributable to the actions of the tobacco industry in differentially passing on the increases in taxes in the years following the implementation of standardized packaging. Correspondingly, the contribution of standardized packaging to downtrading is likely to only be a modest one, if at all. Any impact that downtrading may have on increasing overall demand may also be addressed by policy measures to increase the absolute price and hence reduce affordability of low-priced brands, for example, by increasing tobacco taxes if necessary. Regarding counterfeit tobacco products, our assessment is that the introduction of standardized packaging is unlikely to materially contribute towards an increase in illicit trade in tobacco products in Singapore. We arrived at this view after having carefully considered the arguments and the evidence submitted by the tobacco industry players themselves on illicit trade to the public consultation, as well as, of course, the experience in Australia. Much of the evidence submitted was in relation to Australia's experience, largely because they have had several years since they introduced the measures and have gathered a large data set and also looked at the experience in some ways with the benefit of hindsight. The same evidence was submitted to the WTO panel, which reviewed it in detail. The WTO panel concluded that the evidence did not demonstrate that the introduction of standardized packaging in Australia had led to an increased trade or consumption of illicit tobacco so as to undermine the standardized packaging's contribution to the overall objective of improving public health. In Singapore, the local context is also important. The prevailing form of illicit tobacco in Singapore is that of contraband, i.e. genuine but duty unpaid cigarettes, as opposed to counterfeit cigarettes. Due to the relatively small Singapore market for cigarettes, counterfeit cigarette manufacturers are not incentivized to counterfeit cigarettes for sale in Singapore. In Singapore, illicit tobacco products are sold on the black market rather than at licensed tobacco retailers. And the aim of counterfeiting is to pass off counterfeit products as a genuine article. There has been no evidence submitted in the consultations to MOH to show that buyers on the black market will choose counterfeit products in standardized packaging material over contraband, genuine products. And that really is the like-for-like assessment that one has to make. Overall, therefore, there is no compelling reason to believe that counterfeit products and illicit trade will increase with the introduction of standardized packaging. We will, however, work with customs and other relevant agencies to continue to monitor the situation regarding illicit trade and step up enforcement and educational efforts as necessary. Engineer Dr. Lee Bee Wah has asked whether MOH will be reaching out to retailers. I think her concern, quite rightly, was with the retailers who may have an existing stock of the older non-standardized packaging tobacco products. And she asked if we could reach out to them to help them understand the new standardized packaging requirements, hear their feedback, and also understand any concerns they might have on the implementation deadlines and operationalizing of the implementation. She also asked about the length of the transition period, and these are all very pertinent issues to mitigate the harsh effects there might be against the retailers, particularly those who operate in smaller setups. As mentioned earlier, should this bill be passed, MOH will brief stakeholders within the industry on the proposed specifications for the standardized layouts for tobacco product packaging, so the rules, the requirements will be made clear. In addition, we will also discuss other operational implementation issues that these retailers might have. Tobacco retailers will be invited to these briefings as well. As for the transition period that Engineer Lee raised, other countries that have introduced standardized packaging typically give the industry 3 months to a year from the publication of the requirements for standardized packaging to the start of the sell-through period that I mentioned earlier. In Singapore, for past changes to tobacco packaging, the most recent being the graphic health warning change, we have provided advance notice of somewhere between 9 to 12 months lead time, and we will provide something similar for the SP proposal. On enforcement, Mr. Louis Ng asked about this question and suggested that MOH consider, like the Australians have done, to set up a separate institutionalized body to enforce our standardized packaging measure, similar to Australia's Tobacco Plain Packaging Enforcement Committee. The enforcement of Singapore's tobacco control laws already falls under a specialized regulatory agency, namely the Health Sciences Authority of Singapore. The HSA enforces the labelling requirements for tobacco products, including the existing graphic health warnings, the health information, as well as the sale restriction messages on tobacco packaging. This is usually done at the importer, manufacturer, and also the distributor level. Thus far, we have found the existing regulatory regime to be adequate and sufficient, but we will no doubt keep in mind Mr. Ng's suggestion as we consider the details of implementation if this bill is passed. Professor Lim San San raised some very valid points on what happens with the proliferation of social media. Those are all issues that we have to grapple with, not just in tobacco control, but overall in terms of the messages, the messaging, and the type of information that one gleans and gathers on the social media, which is very much and very quickly proliferating. We have two responses. The first is, under our current Tobacco Control Advertisement Sales Act itself, tobacco-related advertisements in all forms of media are already banned, and that includes advertisements which may emanate from foreign countries overseas, but which are then viewed or shown in Singapore as well. The law is clear on this. We prohibit it, but obviously with so many different influences, and the examples that Professor Lim herself cited, where one can artistically and somewhat perhaps very carefully design the way in which the images are portrayed, might make detection and therefore enforcement a lot more difficult. But nonetheless, we will take on board the suggestion to work more closely with social media companies, with the tech giants of the social media setting, to ensure that this same message is passed through. Which leads to my next point. HPB, Health Promotion Board, already runs a very extensive public education campaign. That's also done online, and that's also done using social media. So apart from enforcing it through the rules which we have in place, we also want to amplify our public education outreach on the same platforms, with the same reach, and hopefully to the same target audience as what these tobacco companies are trying to do. We will continue to do so, and certainly take on board Professor Lim's suggestions as to how we can work more closely with these companies, particularly on the point about algorithms, which is entirely valid. Mr. Ng has asked us to clarify the rationale behind the increase of maximum fines for offences under Section 18 of the Act. Section 18 is a provision that requires any person dealing with tobacco products, and that includes the importing, distributing, selling, and offering for sale in Singapore to hold a valid license issued by the HSA. As mentioned earlier, the aim is to align the maximum penalties in Section 18 with the maximum fines for similarly serious comparable offences pertaining to the importation, distribution, retail, and possession of prohibited tobacco products and also imitation tobacco products under Sections 15 and 16 of the Act, respectively. With the alignment of penalties, we make it clear that offences related to unlicensed dealing of tobacco products are considered as serious offences to the same degree as offences relating to prohibited tobacco products. Mr. Gantiampo asked if we have the profile of smokers in each age group. Based on our population health surveys, we do have information on the general demographic profile of smokers by age group, and that's in part why we are concerned with the initiation of smokers, particularly at a young age. The Health Promotion Board uses such information to customize and also target the education programs and smoking cessation interventions for specific demographic groups in settings such as schools, workplace, healthcare, and also in the community. So, for instance, HPB has developed the Ramadan I Quit Smoking Cessation Program to meet the specific needs of the community. Roadshows are held in various festive bazaars annually to provide cessation support to smokers. So it's not just the campaign or the awareness, but also providing these smokers who are keen to stop support for the cessation program. In 2018, over 4,000 participants from all ethnic groups pledged to quit smoking. HPB has worked closely with MOE as well as with institutes of higher learning to increase education and awareness to prevent youths from taking up tobacco products, or for those who have started to stop. HPB is further leveraging also on social media to better engage youths on the benefits of smoke-free lifestyle and to persuade the young to stay smoke-free. Engineer Lee has urged the government, I think again, to consider designated smoking points in more places, especially in residential areas. This is not quite the issue concerning standardized packaging, but nonetheless, I understand my colleagues at MEWR are monitoring the effectiveness of the Orchard No Smoking Zone before considering whether to replicate the concept elsewhere, perhaps in the estates that Engineer Lee mentioned. We will ask them to consider Engineer Lee's suggestion to study the effectiveness of the DSPs in other areas and the feasibility of piloting a similar no smoking zone concept in residential estates. Engineer Lee also asked what we're doing to tackle cigarette smuggling. Singapore Customs Enforcement teams already, as you know, conduct operations to interdict supply and distribution of duty unpaid cigarettes. Customs work closely with other law enforcement agencies such as the ICA and the SPF to interdict cigarette smuggling into Singapore and also enforce against illegal street peddlers and end consumers to suppress street-level duty unpaid cigarette activities. Customs also organizes targeted outreach programs and community roadshows. And of course, finally, members of the public can also report illegal activities to the Singapore Customs through the 24-hour hotline, by email, or on the mobile app customs@sg. Engineer Lee also suggested that penalties for unlicensed import of tobacco products under the Tobacco Act can include a jail term under the Tobacco Act itself. Currently, selling or dealing in duty unpaid tobacco are already serious offences under the Customs Act. Offenders face a fine of up to 40 times the amount of duty evaded, or up to 6 years jail, or both. The penalties are severe, and they are designed to deter those who may be thinking of engaging in such activities. Mr. Dennis Tan asked two questions related to this. The first is whether or not with the standardized packaging measures in place, one could still import non-compliant cigarette packs into Singapore simply by paying the duty. If you look at the proposed amendments, no importation of any packs not in compliance with the standardized packaging regulations will be allowed. So whether duty is paid or unpaid, the fact of the matter is that if the packaging for the purposes of importation and use into Singapore does not comply with the regulations, then that would not be allowed. As you might note, the only exception to importation into Singapore for non-compliant packages will be for the purposes of re-exporting out of Singapore without it coming into the Singapore market. Mr. Tan also asked if we regulate the size of the cigarettes themselves, presumably because with the standardized packaging measures in place, one could foreseeably see tobacco companies distinguishing themselves by having different cigarette sizes or lengths. Mr. Tan might wish to note that under the new Section 17(3)(a), which is found in Clause 3 of the proposed bill, we already provide for the ability to regulate not just the packaging, but also the size of the actual cigarette itself, the tobacco product itself. Mr. Gantiampo asked if MOH would consider restricting nicotine and other harmful substances in tobacco products. Again, not quite the emphasis of the standardized packaging proposals we have here, but I would like to just inform this House that under the Act, currently, there are already limits set for tar and nicotine in cigarettes. We note that the US FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, is studying the possibility to lower the nicotine content of cigarettes to non-addictive levels. MOH will monitor these developments closely. There will be public health benefit if cigarettes can be made to be non-addictive. But of course, quitting smoking would be much easier. Mr. Gan asked if MOH would consider requiring broadcast media to carry reminders of the harmful effects of tobacco in all screenings of videos, movies, or drama productions where the scenes of smoking cannot be edited and cut. There are presently already content guidelines for media broadcasters to exercise due diligence in the depiction of smoking on TV, in movies, and other media channels. But as Professor Lim did point out, today the media is more than just the traditional TV or video or movies. It's also on the social media as well, on the internet. So with that in mind, we look at the different suite of measures and work out what's best to address and arrest these images. In broad terms, broadcasters must avoid conveying the impression in programs that smoking is socially acceptable, glamorous, or harmless. However, portrayal of smoking in films continues to be a problem worldwide and cannot at present be completely eradicated. However, we will study the suggestion to display anti-smoking messages or advertisements before any films containing tobacco imagery are shown. Mr. Louis Ng, I think, also asked if we could consider restrictions on certain brand variant names. We will give it consideration, but as Mr. Ng knows, we now already prescribe the name of the brand as well as the variant and the way in which it is presented in terms of style and font and color on the package. But we will look at the names to ensure that they are not misleading, which is already the current requirement. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, tobacco use is still a significant public health problem in Singapore. Smoking rates in recent years have not shown a clear pattern of continuous decline, and more than 2,000 Singaporeans die prematurely from smoking-related diseases each year. I thank the members who have spoken today for their support in this bill, and I also note the concerns that have been raised. The decision to introduce the SP proposal, that is to introduce standardized packaging of tobacco products and to enlarge our existing graphic health warning signs, was not taken lightly. We have given very careful, due and deliberate consideration to the available primary evidence, consulted with experts in different fields and different types of experts, and sought also the public's views multiple times. We acknowledge the impact that the introduction of the SP proposal will have on tobacco and its related industries, potentially in terms of costs and other ways as highlighted by various members, including Engineer Lee. And we have taken and will continue to take steps to mitigate this impact. Ultimately, the SP proposal is expected to serve positive objectives and provide substantial public health benefits, including leading to reduced smoking prevalence in Singapore. These objectives and outcomes warrant its introduction in Singapore as an additional measure in our comprehensive, multi-pronged, multifaceted tobacco control strategy. I hope that I have sufficiently addressed members' concerns, and I'm grateful for the support that has been shown for the SP proposal received from members from the public and also from this House. With that, I beg to move.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of the opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Tobacco, Control of Advertisements and Sale Amendment Bill.
Committee stage, what day?
Now, sir, I beg to move that we do resolve ourselves into a committee to consider the bill.
question is that Parliament will immediately resolve itself into a committee on the bill. As many as are of the opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that clauses 1 to 7 stand part of the bill. As many as are of the opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Bill to be reported. Minister for Health.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, can I have a moment?
It's okay. We're ahead of time anyway.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to report that the bill has been considered in committee and without amendment.
It's been agreed to without amendment. Third reading what day?
Now, sir, I beg to move that the bill be considered for a third time. Be read a third time.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time. As many as are of opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Tobacco, Control of Advertisements and Sale Amendment Bill.